Hello, how y'all doing? In 7 days, when I'm recording this, the 2021 NBA season's about to begin. I am stoked. It's like reality TV for men. It's like keeping up with the Kardashians, but we can call it keeping up with LeBron. I'm in Hawaii these last couple weeks, and it really got me thinking about the past. And one of the biggest things in my life is basketball. And I've played maybe 7, 8 seasons of fantasy basketball, and I was like, okay, why not just put together a compilation of all the things that I've learned, and maybe one person out there might win their league because of it. So this is basically what everything I've learned, and if I was to play fantasy basketball this season, how I'd approach it. Let me know what you think. So let's get right into it. For this video, I'm going to be mainly focusing on the standard 10-team, 13-man roster. And, one of the main things that I think I've personally faced in my previous seasons, and I'm pretty sure you guys have, is that let's say you're a three-point specialist team, right? You got all the three-point shooters. You got your Ray Allens. You got your Kyle Korvers. And then all of a sudden, the player you're playing with picks up three people from the waiver, and all of a sudden, where did all these threes come from? Like, sometimes it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, where on earth are these waiver wire players being able to score as much? You have your Jamal Crawford just coming off the bench somewhere, off the waiver wire, dropping 50. It's like, okay, where did that happen? So what I wanted to first break down is what are the stats that are least likely found in the waiver wire, right? What this means is that let's say I'm dominant. This is what my cat is. I'm a steals expert. I wanted to see which category would it be really hard for the opponent to just pick two people up from the waiver wire and be able to catch up to me. So how I compiled these stats were I took the 2021 predicted data from the ESPN website and I compiled the totals for all of the stats in your typical 8-category league. So assists, steals, blocks, rebounds, three-point mades, and points. I left out field goals and free throw percentages for this chart. And I wanted to see what percent of those stats were in each of those rounds. So I split the first 4 rounds into early, the next 4 into mid, the last 4 into late, and the final 4 into the waiver wire. So if we look at this, with the color coding where the darker the blue, the higher the percent. So if we look at assists, for example, we can see that in the early round, 37.7% of the total predicted assists for this season will be in those first 40 players, while the waiver wire would only have 17, right? So the difference there is 20%. What that means is that let's say I'm an assist dominant team. The ability for another player to just pick somebody up off the waiver and be able to help them in that cat is very low. But if we take the complete opposite spectrum and we take three-point made, for example, 22% of all threes in the league will be found in the waiver wire, which means that it's only 8% less than the early stats, which means that let's say I'm a three-point specialist team. It is going to be much easier for my opponent to just pick up 2 or 3 players from the waiver wire and be a three-point specialist as well, which makes it much more difficult for me. So looking at this stat, I have to pick between, okay, do I want to be an assist-heavy team or a points-heavy team? And simply because of the fact that the waiver wire has 17.4% for assists while it has 18.2% for points, I will be going on the approach that you specialize your first few picks in this year's draft as assist specialists. Another cool insight we can actually make from this data is that I can completely fill out the rest of my roster towards the late rounds with steals, blocks, and three-point mades, right? So I don't even need to really focus on that in the early rounds. I can completely wait until the final round to just pick up a bunch of those. So the main strategy a lot of people employ is this idea of dropping a few cats. So you cannot be a solid, formidable team if you focus on all 8 categories, because how many players out there can get you blocks, rebounds, steals, assists, everything, right? So you're going to have to pick and choose which categories you want to specialize in and which ones to drop. And I think that is one of the most difficult parts of the entire game. So now that we have decided that assists will be the best category to focus our early rounds on, I then wanted to figure out what are the other categories that would fit extremely well with assists. So now we have another chart here, and this is the correlation chart. So it shows you the more red the color, it means that the more associated the 2 categories are. So for example, if we look at the first row in the 4th column, rebounds and field goal percentage, it says 0.62. This means that as your rebounds go up, the field goal percentage is much more likely to also go up at this correlation rate, 0.62, as opposed to if you take three-point made in field goal percentage, where it's negative 0.66. What that means is as your field goal percentage goes up, your three-point made will go down. So let's take the column that we care about right now, assists, because that's the one we wanted to focus on. For the purposes of this video, we can say that all the blue columns means that there is almost no way you can win both of those categories. It would be extremely difficult. So we can probably just end up dropping those. So for assist, if we look at the assist column, we can see that the 3 blue values are going to be field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks. And that's something that you would just assume. I really wanted to only show it mathematically why those would be the ones. But you can assume you have your guards who are getting you most of your assists. You're most likely not going to have great field goal percentages, rebounds, and or blocks. On the other hand, using this chart, we can see that the 5 categories we will want to be focusing on will be free throw percentage, 3-point made, steals, and points, and assists, obviously. So these are going to be the 5 categories we're going to mainly be focusing on. So on that note, one thing I wanted to focus on is an issue that I've always had in fantasy leagues is with my percentages. Because the way it works is that as an entire unit, it doesn't matter if most of your players shoot above 80%, right? If you have one Luka Doncic, if you have one Giannis who shoots like 7 or 8 free throws a game, and they end up shooting at a clip of like maybe 70% or 67%, that completely tanks your entire category. So as we are an assist-heavy team, one thing that you would love to focus on is making sure that you don't draft any players who shoots a high volume of free throws, right? So you have your LeBrons, you have your Lukas. Even though they may get you many assists, you want to make sure you stay away from those type of players because they will tank your free throw percentage. That being said, players like Steph and Trae Young are excellent players who will get you your assists, who will get you your threes, who will get you your steals, as well as they will give you an excellent free throw percentage. The reason percentages are such an important statistic is they're the only statistic that doesn't matter how many players you have. I could have 10 players straight from the waiver wire who shoot 1 shot a game and 1 free throw a game. And as long as they're making those, I would have an extremely high free throw and field goal percentages. So the power of the percentages is that even if my best player gets injured, those categories can still be sustained, right? Because it doesn't matter how many shots I'm making. It just matters whether I'm making a high percentage of them. So that being kept in mind, you want to also try to make sure you keep your field goal percentage around 0.45, 0.46. So in case in the middle of the season, let's say you realized based on those 5 categories we said earlier, you can't win one of them. You can simply just drop points, for example, and try to shift over to a field goal percentage where you trade off some of the players who are tanking your field goals and draft some people from the waiver wire who, even if they don't shoot a lot, make sure they make most of their shots. And that could be another category you can win. Now, the next thing I wanted to actually focus on was one issue that I've had is before I've wanted to focus on points before. And I ended up getting every player who could get straight buckets every round. And what ended up happening was I would beat every other player every week in points, but I would have so many more points. I would have 150 more points every week than all the other players. It was like, okay, what's the point? Like, why am I pushing this boundary so far? Because I don't need to win by 150. I just need to win by 1 point, right? So that made me really want to look at how much do these stats vary? What stats vary the most? Because if a stat, let's say I have blocks, for example, and most of the players either go from I have 2 blocks a game or I get 0. That means that you can't really predict on average what your week stats will be, which means that the amount that you need to prepare for needs to be much more as compared to another stat where if the variance is very low, then you can expect that most likely week to week, your averages will be around the same. So I compiled some more data for that. So if you look at this chart, I took the variances of each of the 8 categories and I normalized it by their mean. So what this really means is that if you look at blocks and steals, the dark reds, it shows that these categories will vary the most from week to week. So it is much more difficult to predict how many blocks you will have every week, as opposed to if you take your field goal percentage, your free throw percentage, or your points made. There will be a much more consistent pattern there. So, and this is pretty easy to observe just from watching basketball, right? You have even your point guards. You may some days get 2 blocks. You may some day get 1 block. And then so many other games you'll just have 0, right? So when there's such a big difference in what you're able to produce, obviously there will be a much larger variance there. So now, using this variance, I calculated the averages that a team would need that's focusing on assists to be able to be a dominant team. So the next chart that I'm going to show are all the averages that would make you a very formidable threat in that in that category. The dark blues are the categories that you're not really focusing on because the other 5 are the ones you're going to be focusing on. And these other 5 are excellent metrics to reach. So a simple way you can actually calculate this yourself on your draft day is just take the average, for your points, assists, whatever, and then multiply by 3.3. So I'll tell you how I came up with this number. 3.3 is on average the number of games a player plays in a week. So if I looked at the 2018 and 2019 schedules, and it comes out to approximately 3.3 games per week, which means that almost every 3 or 4 weeks a player will have a back-to-back. In those games, they'll have 4 games. So let's say, for example, I draft LeBron. LeBron has 10 assists per game. That means per week, I should be expecting 33 assists from him. 3.3 times 10, 33. Boom. And our strategy should be to take all of these averages, add them up together, and try to reach the marks that we put here. Most of the times, we will not need to go significantly over this bar. It is definitely a high-end bar, and if you're able to reach, for example, the 629.98 points that's on that chart, you should most likely be a very formidable points team. So these are all the stats that you should aim to hit, and I hope that this all helps you with your fantasy league. And I'll have another episode talking about injuries, how we can make sure our fantasy team stays consistent even through injuries. And these are just a few tips to make sure, not necessarily that you'll win, but at the very least be a competitor in the league. And at no point in the season do you just kind of get thrown out to the side where you're just like, there's no way that person will win. You will always stay formidable, and you'll always have a slight advantage over at least the noobs in your league with some of these tips. So let me know what you think, and let me know if it works for you. All right, have a good day.